Dr. Johnson, a black pediatric heart surgeon, races through the airport, a 6-year-old's life literally in his hands. Suddenly, he's slammed against a wall, cuffed by a white officer at his gate, humiliated before takeoff. Why? He matched a description. As the cuffs snap shut and his flight departs without him, precious time bleeds away. Miles away, his tiny patient dies waiting. Witness the shocking injustice, the devastating human cost of bias, and the viral firestorm demanding accountability. One moment, irreversible consequences. How does a healer cope? What happens next? The fluorescent lights of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport hummed with the strained energy of early morning travel. It was 8:45 a.m., a time when hope and anxiety mingled in the recycled air, when departures felt like small tears in the fabric of routine. Dr. Darnell Johnson, his hand firm on the handle of his rolling suitcase, navigated the currents of human traffic with the practiced ease of a frequent flyer, yet his mind was miles away, already scrubbing in. In Chicago, a 6-year-old boy named Malik waited, his small heart faltering, relying on the skill Darnell carried in his hands, the knowledge nested deep in his brain. He'd just left his wife, Yvette, and their daughter, 8-year-old Layla, at the curb. Layla's hug had been fierce, her small arms tight around his neck. "Bring back deep dish pizza, Daddy?" she'd whispered, her breath warm against his cheek. Yvette's kiss was softer, weighted with the unspoken pressure of his profession. "Be safe. Fly well," she'd murmured, her eyes reflecting the same blend of pride and worry he saw every time he left for a critical case. Their faces, luminous with love and morning light, were imprinted behind his eyelids. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from the receiving hospital in Chicago. "Patient's vitals stable. Prep underway. See you soon, Dr. J." He allowed himself a small exhale, a release of tension. Soon, he quickened his pace towards Gate 12. The rhythmic click of his suitcase wheels a counterpoint to the thrumming in his chest. Boarding began in 15 minutes. Everything was on schedule. He was a healer, a mender of the most fragile organ. At Grady Hospital, Atlanta's sprawling public health anchor, he was Dr. Johnson, chief of pediatric cardiothoracic surgery. His hands, steady and precise, had repaired holes in hearts no bigger than a walnut, rerouted vessels fine as thread. He carried the weight of tiny lives, the trust of terrified parents. Here, in the anonymous flow of the airport, he was just another traveler, albeit one dressed in smart business casual, his demeanor composed, his focus absolute. Earlier, near the check-in counter, a small friction point. A harried-looking white man in a wrinkled suit had asked Darnell, already settled in a coveted seat near a charging station, if he'd mind moving so his family could sit together. Darnell, juggling his phone, boarding pass, and the mental checklist for the surgery, had politely declined. "Sorry, I need to stay near this outlet to keep updated on my patient. My flight boards soon." The man's face had tightened, color rising in his neck. "Whatever," he'd snapped, turning away. Then, just loud enough for Darnell to hear, the muttered venom, "You people always cause trouble." Darnell had felt the familiar sting, the weary resignation. "You people." The catch-all phrase, lazy and loaded, designed to diminish, to categorize, to erase individuality. He'd let it go, attributing it to the man's stress, the universal frustrations of air travel. He had a more important destination, a life hanging in the balance. He couldn't afford the energy for outrage, but the residue of the encounter lingered, an unpleasant film. It was still there as he approached Gate 12, where the electronic sign glowed Chicago O'Hare. And standing near the podium, arms crossed, surveying the queue with an air of proprietorial authority, was a white police officer, Officer Brian Hargrove. His uniform was crisp, his jaw set. His eyes, pale blue and narrowed, swept over the passengers, snagging on Darnell. There was an instant tightening in the officer's posture, a subtle shift from passive observation to active focus. It was the kind of attention Darnell, a black man navigating America his entire life, recognized instantly. It was the look that preceded the demand, the suspicion, the escalation. Darnell felt a prickle of unease, but pushed it down. He was a doctor on his way to save a child. He had his ID, his boarding pass, his legitimacy. He continued forward, aiming for the sky priority lane. Hargrove stepped directly into his path, blocking him. The officer's hand rested casually, almost possessively, on the butt of his holstered firearm. "Sir, step aside," Hargrove barked. The command wasn't a request, it was an order accustomed to immediate obedience. The noise level around them seemed to dip as nearby passengers paused, sensing conflict. Darnell stopped, keeping his voice level, professional. "Officer, I'm boarding this flight. I'm a surgeon, Dr. Darnell Johnson." He reached for his wallet, intending to show his hospital ID alongside his driver's license. "I have a critical surgery in Chicago. Hands where I can see him. Now." Hargrove's voice boomed, cutting through the terminal murmur. Heads snapped towards them. A woman gasped. Darnell saw a young Asian woman a few feet away, Ji-Yun Park. Though he didn't know her name then, instinctively raised her smartphone, her face a mask of focused intensity. Darnell froze, his hand hovering near his jacket pocket. Confusion warred with a rising tide of indignation, quickly followed by a cold wave of fear. This was wrong. Utterly, terrifyingly wrong. "Officer, I assure you, I'm just trying to On your knees. Hands behind your back." Hargrove moved closer, his face inches from Darnell's, his breath smelling faintly of stale coffee and something else, a sour certainty. The world tilted. Darnell felt the collective gaze of the gate area burning into him. He saw suspicion, fear, and a chilling flicker of morbid curiosity in the eyes of the onlookers. Humiliation washed over him, hot and sickening. He was Dr. Johnson. He saved children's lives. And here, under the sterile airport lights, he was being treated like a dangerous criminal. "You're making a mistake," Darnell whispered, the words catching in his throat. His hands trembled, not from guilt, but from adrenaline and disbelief. He slowly lowered himself to his knees, the hard, unforgiving tile pressing into his kneecaps. The smooth fabric of his trousers offered no cushion. Hargrove roughly grabbed his wrists, yanking them behind his back. The metallic snap of the handcuffs echoed in the sudden silence. Pain shot up Darnell's arms as the cold steel bit into his skin. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes now wide with alarm, stepped forward. "Officer, excuse me, what is going on? This man is a passenger, he's a doctor. Stay back. This is official police business." Hargrove snarled, his authority absolute in that moment. He pulled Darnell roughly to his feet, shoving him towards a nearby wall. "You match the description of a suspect involved in a disturbance." "A disturbance?" Darnell's mind raced. The man at the charging station? That petty, muttered insult? This couldn't be happening. "Officer, I can explain. There was a minor disagreement. But you can explain downtown." Hargrove cut him off, patting him down with unnecessary force. He felt the officer's hands linger on his wallet, pull it out. Hargrove flipped it open, glanced dismissively at the medical credentials nestled beside the driver's license. For a fraction of a second, Darnell thought recognition, reason, might prevail. It didn't. Hargrove shoved the wallet back into Darnell's pocket. "We'll sort this out." Tom stretched, distorted. Darnell stood cuffed against the wall, the object of stares, whispers, and the unwavering lens of Ji-Yun Park's phone. He watched, helpless, as the final boarding call for his flight echoed through the gate area. He saw the jet bridge door swing shut. His heart plummeted. It took another 20 agonizing minutes for a supervising officer summoned by the increasingly frantic gate agent to arrive. 20 minutes of public degradation. 20 minutes while Malik's window of stability potentially narrowed. The supervisor, a black woman with tired eyes, listened patiently to the gate agent, glanced at Darnell's ID, and spoke quietly but firmly to Hargrove. The cuffs came off. The apologies were clipped, bureaucratic. "Misunderstanding." Matched a vague description. "Following protocol." Hargrove stood stiffly, avoiding Darnell's gaze, a flicker of something unreadable, annoyance? Defiance? In his eyes. There was no remorse. Not yet. Darnell, rubbing his raw wrists, felt numb. The flight was gone. He pulled out his phone, his fingers clumsy. He had to call Chicago, explain the inexplicable. As he dialed, a notification popped up. A news alert. He ignored it, focusing on the call. "Chicago Children's, how can I direct your call? This is Dr. Darnell Johnson. Connect me to the OR, please. It's urgent." The wait felt like an eternity. Then the voice of the lead nurse strained. "Dr. Johnson? Where are you? We've been trying to reach you." I was detained. Unavoidably delayed." "Is he? How is Malik?" A pause, heavy with static and sorrow. "Dr. Johnson, we lost him. His pressure dropped suddenly about 30 minutes ago. We couldn't stabilize him. He arrested en route. We did everything we could." The phone slipped from Darnell's numb fingers, clattering onto the airport floor. The sounds of the terminal faded into a dull roar. En route. While he was on his knees, cuffed like a common thief. While Officer Hargrove was following protocol. Malik, 6 years old. Gone. The world tilted again, and this time, darkness rushed in at the edges. The regret Hargrove would soon feel was already a catastrophic reality for Darnell and for a family in Chicago whose world had just irrevocably broken. The karma wasn't instant for the perpetrator, but its tragic consequence was immediate and absolute for the victim and for the child whose life depended on him. The video hit the internet like a spark on dry tinder. Ji-Yeon Park, the young Korean-American journalist who had captured the arrest, worked for a digital news outlet known for its quick turnaround and focus on social issues. Her footage was raw, shaky, but undeniably powerful. It showed Dr. Johnson's calm attempts to explain Officer Hargrove's aggressive escalation, the snap of the cuffs, the disbelief on Darnell's face, the background murmurings of the crowd. Ji-Yeon had added minimal text. Dr. Darnell Johnson, pediatric heart surgeon, wrongfully detained by APD Officer Brian Hargrove at ATL Gate 12 while en route to emergency surgery. Flight missed. By 10 a.m. it was exploding. By noon, #JusticeForDarnell was the top trending hashtag nationwide. The initial clip was followed by Ji-Yeon's swift, tenacious reporting. She'd gotten confirmation from Chicago Children's Hospital. She'd learned the patient's name, Malik Johnson, a cruel coincidence of surnames that somehow deepened the tragedy and his fate. The story wasn't just about wrongful detention anymore, it was about a life lost, a direct, horrifying consequence of racial profiling. Fury erupted. It poured onto social media feeds, flooded the Atlanta Police Department's phone lines, and spilled into the real world. Protesters, galvanized by years of similar incidents, began converging on Hartsfield Jackson. Black Lives Matter activists, civil rights groups, healthcare professionals, ordinary citizens sickened by the injustice, they arrived with signs demanding accountability, their chants echoing through the terminals, no justice, no peace. Fire Hargrove now. Docs save lives, cops take them. Miles away, in the quiet, manicured suburb of Sandy Springs, Karen Hargrove stared at her laptop screen, her face pale. Ji-Yeon's video played on a loop, the image of her husband's snarling face juxtaposed with the dignified, desperate pleas of Dr. Johnson. The comments section scrolled relentlessly, a torrent of rage and condemnation aimed at Brian. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from blocked numbers, texts filled with vitriol. Brian had come home early, tight-lipped and defensive, muttering about procedure, about a match, about the stress of the job. He'd retreated to his den, the door shut, the television murmuring low. Their teenage son, Ethan, a thoughtful, quiet kid already grappling with the complexities of race and policing he saw debated online and at school, had taken one look at the video on his own phone and retreated to his room, unable to meet his father's eyes. The silence in the house was thick with unspoken questions, with a dawning horror. Karen finally pushed back from the laptop, walked to the den, and opened the door without knocking. Brian looked up, startled, his face etched with a mixture of anger and fear. "Brian," Karen's voice trembled. "What were you thinking?" Meanwhile, in Darnell's own home, the numbness had given way to a grief so profound it felt physical, a crushing weight on his chest. He sat on the sofa, Yvette beside him, her arm wrapped tightly around him, her own tears falling silently onto his shoulder. Layla, confused by the hushed tones and the palpable sadness that had descended on their home, sat on the floor, drawing. She looked up, her brow furrowed. "Why'd they hurt you, Daddy? Were you bad?" The innocence of the question shattered Darnell. He pulled his daughter onto his lap, holding her tight. "No, baby girl. Daddy wasn't bad. Sometimes people make terrible mistakes because they don't see clearly." How could he explain systemic racism, implicit bias, the crushing weight of history to an 8-year-old? Yvette's tears flowed faster. "He was going to save a little boy, Layla, just like he saves other children. And that policeman." He stopped him. The doorbell rang. It was Marisol Torres, a renowned civil rights attorney, her face grim but resolute. A friend of Yvette's from college. She had seen the video and driven straight over. She embraced Yvette, then sat opposite Darnell, her gaze filled with fierce empathy. "Darnell, I am so sorry," she began, her voice low but firm. "For what happened to you, for that child? Malik, this is unconscionable. But we are not going to let this stand. We will fight. We will demand accountability. For you. For Malik. For everyone who has ever been seen as a threat simply because of the color of their skin." At the Atlanta Police Department headquarters downtown, the atmosphere was tense. Chief Henderson, facing a public relations nightmare and genuine outrage from within the city government, had swiftly announced Officer Hargrove's suspension pending a full investigation. Internal Affairs was already interviewing witnesses, including the gate agent and the supervising officer who had released Darnell. Hargrove found himself isolated. Colleagues who might have previously shared a cynical joke or commiserated about difficult shifts now avoided his eye. The casual camaraderie of the precinct evaporated. As he cleared his locker, Luis Mendez, a veteran Latino officer who had seen his share of bias from both sides of the badge, walked past. Mendez paused, his expression unreadable. "Saw the video, man," Mendez said quietly, shaking his head. "You brought this on yourself. That wasn't procedure. That was prejudice." He didn't wait for a reply, just kept walking, leaving Hargrove standing alone amidst the echoing silence of his own making. The viral fury wasn't just outside the walls, it was beginning to seep in, eroding the foundations of his world. The consequences were no longer abstract, they were immediate, personal, and just beginning. The air in the Atlanta City Hall chambers crackled with tension. Every seat was filled and people lined the walls, their faces a mixture of anger, grief, and determination. Microphones stood ready for the public comment section of the emergency city council meeting convened to address the incident at Gate 12. The mayor looked grim, the police chief uncomfortable. When Darnell Johnson approached the podium, a hush fell over the room. He stood tall, impeccably dressed, but the trauma was visible in the slight tremor in his hands, the shadows beneath his eyes. He didn't speak with fury, but with a profound, sorrowful clarity that commanded attention. "My name is Dr. Darnell Johnson," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion thickening his throat. "I am a pediatric heart surgeon at Grady Hospital. Last Tuesday, I was on my way to Chicago to perform a life-saving operation on a 6-year-old boy named Malik. I never made it." He recounted the events at the gate, the polite declination, the officer's sudden aggression, the humiliation of the cuffs, the agony of missing his flight. He spoke of the call, the devastating news of Malik's death. "Officer Hargrove did not see a doctor rushing to save a child," Darnell said, his voice gaining strength, resonating through the chamber. "He did not see a husband, a father, a respected member of this community. He saw a black man, and in his eyes, that meant suspect. That meant threat. That assumption, rooted in a bias that permeates too much of our society and, yes, our police force, had catastrophic consequences. A child is dead because I was seen not as a healer, but as a problem." The room erupted. Shouts of shame and justice for Malik echoed off the walls. People rose to their feet, fists raised. Marisol Torres, standing beside Darnell, placed a steadying hand on his arm. The mayor banged the gavel, calling for order, but the wave of raw emotion was undeniable. Darnell's testimony had given voice to the pain and frustration of countless others who had experienced similar injustices. Meanwhile, Brian Hargrove sat slumped in a sterile conference room at an off-site training facility attending a mandatory emergency bias seminar hastily arranged for his precinct. He felt defensive, resentful. This was all blown out of proportion, a media circus. He'd made a judgment call based on a vague description and the guy's attitude, hadn't he? The speaker was Pastor Michael Coleman, a respected black community leader with a calm demeanor and penetrating gaze. Pastor Coleman wasn't shouting, he was telling stories. He recounted his own experiences, being pulled over multiple times for driving while black, the fear his teenage son felt during any police interaction, the constant low-level anxiety of being perceived as inherently suspicious. "This isn't about condemning every officer," Pastor Coleman said, his eyes scanning the room, seeming to linger for a moment on Hargrove. "It's about acknowledging the reality of implicit bias. It's about understanding how stereotypes, ingrained over generations, can unconsciously shape our perceptions and our actions, especially under pressure. It's about recognizing the power dynamic and the potential for devastating harm when that power is misused, even unintentionally." Hargrove shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He tried to tune it out, to dismiss it as liberal guilt-tripping. But Darnell Johnson's face kept flashing in his mind, the disbelief, the quiet dignity even on his knees. And then, the stark fact, a child was dead. His judgment call. His actions. A crack appeared in his wall of denial. Later that evening, the tension in the Hargrove house was unbearable. Ethan found his father staring blankly at the muted television screen. The usual banter, the shared jokes, felt impossible now. Ethan took a deep breath. "I saw the video, Dad," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Everyone at school is talking about it." About you. Hargrove flinched. Ethan, it's complicated. You don't understand. What's not to understand? Ethan interrupted, a rare flash of anger in his eyes. You hurt that man. You stopped him from doing his job. From saving someone. Why? Because he was black. It wasn't like that. Hargrove protested weakly. Then what was it like? Ethan pressed, stepping closer. My friends, some of my black friends, they're scared of cops. Scared of people like you. Is that what you want? You're the reason kids fear cops, Dad. The accusation, coming from his own son, hit Hargrove harder than any public condemnation. He had no answer. Ethan turned and walked away, leaving his father alone with the wreckage of his certainty. The pressure mounted from all sides. The Department of Justice announced it was opening a federal civil rights investigation into the incident and patterns of practice within the APD. Protesters, their numbers swelling daily, marched from the airport to City Hall, and then to Grady Hospital, holding a vigil for Malik and showing solidarity with Darnell. At Grady, Darnell found solace and strength in the unwavering support of his colleagues. Nurses hugged him. Fellow doctors clapped him on the shoulder. Dr. Raj Patel, a brilliant Indian-American cardiologist who often collaborated with Darnell, stopped him in the hallway. Darnell, what happened was horrific and absolute disgrace, Raj said, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by somber intensity. But I want you to know we all stand with you. This isn't just your fight. You're not alone in this. Darnell nodded, gratitude warring with the ever-present grief. He was beginning to understand that this moment, born of personal trauma, was becoming something larger, a catalyst, a focal point for a reckoning long overdue. The path forward was unclear, shrouded in pain, but he knew he couldn't walk it alone, nor could he turn back. The memory of Malik and the injustice that bound their fates demanded more. The fall was swift, brutal, and public. Facing termination proceedings, intense federal scrutiny, and the relentless weight of public condemnation, Brian Hargrove resigned from the Atlanta Police Department. The career he had built, the identity he had worn like armor, dissolved. His defensiveness crumbled under the combined weight of the DOJ investigation findings, which highlighted procedural failures and implicit bias, and the irrefutable evidence of the video. His home life disintegrated alongside his professional one. The chasm between him and Karen, widened by his initial denial and the sheer horror of the incident's consequences, became unbridgeable. Ethan remained distant, polite but wounded, the easy relationship they once shared replaced by a strained silence. Karen asked him to move out. The house in Sandy Springs, once a symbol of his middle-class stability, felt hollow as he packed his few belongings into boxes, the quiet amplifying his isolation. One gray, drizzly afternoon, about a month after the incident, Hargrove found himself driving aimlessly. He ended up parked across the street from Grady Hospital. He watched the flow of people, doctors in scrubs, nurses heading home, families arriving with anxious faces. He got out of the car and walked, almost involuntarily, towards a small, newly dedicated courtyard garden near the pediatric wing. In the center stood a simple granite bench and a small bronze plaque affixed to a low stone wall. He approached it hesitantly. The inscription was clear, stark, in memory of Malik Johnson, age 6. His life, tragically cut short, reminds us that justice delayed is justice denied. May his spirit inspire us to build a more equitable world. Hargrove stood there for a long time, the drizzle dampening his hair and jacket. He read the words again and again. Justice delayed is justice denied. His delay. His actions. He thought of the small, unseen face behind the name, the potential extinguished. He thought of Dr. Johnson, the man he had forced to his knees. For the first time, the regret wasn't just about losing his job or his family, it was a deeper, more profound ache, a recognition of the irreversible harm he had caused. Born from a prejudice he hadn't even fully acknowledged within himself until it was too late. There was no instant karma profound enough to balance the scales of a lost life. There was only the slow, agonizing burn of consequence. Darnell Johnson, meanwhile, channeled his grief and the outpouring of public support into action. He couldn't bring Malik back, but he could honor his memory by fighting for change. With the help of Marisol Torres, Yvette, and a coalition of community leaders, healthcare professionals, and activists, he launched the Malik Johnson Foundation for Equity in Healthcare and Policing. Its mission was twofold: to advocate for policies that addressed racial disparities in medical access and outcomes, and to push for meaningful police reform, including robust implicit bias training, independent oversight, and community-led accountability measures. The foundation's unveiling ceremony took place in the same Grady courtyard where Hargrove had stood days earlier. A diverse crowd gathered: colleagues, patients' families, activists, city officials, including the mayor and a chastened police chief, and Ji-Yun Park, whose documentary on the incident and its fallout was already garnering national attention and awards. Standing before the plaque bearing Malik's name, Darnell spoke, his voice filled with emotion but unwavering in its purpose. "Malik Johnson should be alive today," he said. His death was not just a medical event, it was the endpoint of a chain reaction ignited by bias, by a failure to see shared humanity. We cannot undo that tragedy. But we can and we must ensure it sparks lasting change. This foundation is not just a memorial, it is a commitment. A commitment to dismantling the systemic inequities that endanger Black lives, whether in a hospital bed or at an airport gate. Malik's light was extinguished too soon, but his memory will fuel our fight for a just future. In the wake of the scandal and the DOJ investigation, the Atlanta Police Department implemented significant changes. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers. The bias training, once a perfunctory exercise, was revamped, incorporating community voices and ongoing evaluation. An independent civilian review board was granted expanded powers. These were steps, imperfect but necessary, born from a moment of profound injustice that had refused to be ignored. The city, scarred but mobilized, began the slow, arduous work of rebuilding trust. Years passed. The raw edges of the wound began to scar over, though the mark remained. Atlanta, like the nation, continued its halting, often contentious journey towards racial equity. Layla Johnson, the little girl who had asked why they hurt her daddy, was now a sharp, passionate law student at Emory University. She spent her summers interning at the Malik Johnson Foundation, drafting policy proposals, organizing community outreach programs. The fire lit that day at Gate 12 now burned in her, channeled into a fierce dedication to justice. Darnell watched her with pride, tinged with the bittersweet knowledge of the event that had shaped her path. He continued his work at Grady, his hands still steady, his commitment to healing unwavering, but now carrying the added weight and purpose of his advocacy. Brian Hargrove, after drifting through a series of unsatisfying jobs, found unexpected direction working at a community center in a diverse, lower-income neighborhood far from Sandy Springs. He ran an after-school program mentoring teenagers, many of whom were wary of authority, especially police authority. Hesitantly at first, then with growing conviction, he began incorporating discussions about systemic racism, bias, and restorative justice into their sessions. He shared his own story, not as an excuse, but as a cautionary tale, a painful lesson learned. It wasn't absolution, but it was a form of amends, a quiet effort to repair some small part of the damage he represented. His marriage hadn't survived, but he maintained a fragile, slowly rebuilding relationship with Ethan. Now a young man navigating his own understanding of the world his father had impacted. One crisp autumn Saturday, the Malik Johnson Foundation held its annual Rally for Justice and Equality in downtown Atlanta's Woodruff Park. Layla was one of the speakers, her voice ringing clear and strong over the assembled crowd. Darnell stood near the edge, listening, his heart full. Across the park, near a cluster of trees, Brian Hargrove stood alone, listening too. He hadn't planned to come, but he'd seen the flyer at the community center. He kept his distance, a spectator on the periphery of a movement born from his own failure. As the rally concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Hargrove turned to leave. His eyes inadvertently met Darnell's across the thinning crowd. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. No words were exchanged. There was no easy forgiveness, no neat resolution. But in that shared gaze, there was a silent acknowledgement of the profound pain inflicted and endured, of the slow, arduous path of change Hargrove was attempting, of the relentless courage Darnell and his family embodied, and of the vast, challenging road that still stretched before them all. A slight, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. A recognition not of reconciliation, perhaps, but of a shared, complex reality. The fight for justice wasn't over. It was, and always would be, a work in progress, demanding relentless courage, accountability, and the unwavering belief in the possibility of a better, more equitable world. One moment had ignited a firestorm, but true, lasting change required the steady, persistent tending of the flame. Thank you for watching Dr. Johnson's powerful story. We hope it offered perspective and resonated deeply. If you believe these narratives need to be heard, help amplify them. Please like, Share this video and subscribe for more vital content. Your support matters.